Hello, everyone. And no, you are not time traveling back to 2010. You are actually still in 2023. This is a modern article. This is a current topic. So, yeah, we are grave digging an argument from 2009, 2010, bringing it into the year of 2023 for a hypothetical remake for a game that does not exist yet, and according to Jade King, shouldn't exist because it is just too racist to be a thing that should be done. According to Jade King, that's one hell of a stance to take. But I'd like to start off first by educating you, because there is indeed a difference between a remake and a remaster. You go on to say that Resident Evil 4 has been remastered thrice, meaning three times. It hasn't. It had one remaster that I'm aware of in like 2010 called the HD edition that brought it up to a higher resolution and a little bit better graphics. That's about it. Really just did higher resolution. That's not a remake. That's a remaster. The new one, 2023, that is a remake, a complete overhaul of the game from the ground up. That is what you would consider a remake. So don't call the 2023 version a remaster. See, the difference is that a remaster just updates things like graphics and audio quality. It usually just brings in support for higher resolutions, maybe swaps out some textures for a little higher res and higher graphical fidelity, and some of the audio gets remastered into being a little clearer, a little better, a little higher quality. A remake takes the base game mechanics, the story, all the fundamentals that make it the game that it is, they modernize it and they completely overhaul it. That's the difference between a remake and a remaster. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain this to a games journalist. Just saying, I feel like you should know these things. You shouldn't be getting these things wrong as a games journalist when your exclusive job is to report on the news of the gaming industry. You should know the terminology, Jade King. But let's go ahead and start off with some of the odder things that come up in the article at the very start. So, Jade King goes ahead and says that Resident Evil 4 influenced Gears of War. I don't know how true that is. I'd imagine with every third person shooter, there's a little bit of Resident Evil 4's DNA slapped in there because it had such revolutionary controls and how it handled third person shooting. I'd imagine just about every third person shooter has, like I said, a little bit of RE4's DNA slapped in there. But I don't know how much it really influenced Gears of War, a completely different series. You then go on to state what I believe is you're calling RE5 a pale imitation to Resident Evil 4, which I don't believe that to be accurate in the slightest. RE4 and RE5 share very little in common. I can understand that maybe like the fact that they're third person shooters and they have a lot of the same systems with like pickups from enemies, treasures, like the very very core fundamentals of Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5 are similar. But past that, there's really nothing. Like the game itself is very very different from Resident Evil 4. A good example of it is the fact that Resident Evil 5 focuses really really hard into the cooperative experience. That's their main goal, is to create a very fun and engaging cooperative game. Resident Evil 4 didn't have any co-op to it. So that right off the bat is a very distinct difference between the two. And of course, you end that statement with the fact that the game's legacy is eternally tainted in racism, which is again absolutely ridiculous in every way. So I guess I'll start it off though with extending an olive branch, I suppose. I will give you, there is some merit to one of the arguments you made in this article where you talked about the swamp areas of Resident Evil 5 where the enemies are dressed in these stereotypical like tribal wear, and so I feel like we can at least start off in some form of agreement, right? We can both agree that that section of the game, that is a little much. We can at least start there. However, you go way off the deep end because after reading the article, the only thing that I really think that you hate about the entirety of the game and find the most damning as it being racist, it isn't this one off stereotype in like the first quarter of the game that you have issue with. It's not that. It's the fact that it is a white man going to Africa and having to kill Africans. This is the de facto where you find issue with the game. That's why you hate it. That's why you think it's racist. We're going to ignore the fact that you actually have a partner in the game whom is black in Sheva, which, by the way, one of still to this day one of the worst AI companions I've ever had to play with. Just absolutely useless if she's just an AI. Oh god. That was probably the worst part of the entirety of the game, if I'm being honest. Getting clips and footage for this video, I was reminded of how bad it really was. The amount of times she just stands behind me and shoots me in the back of the head, or runs off and doesn't do what she's supposed to be doing, or will sit there and do little quick turns like 8 times because the AI gets confused on where she's supposed to go. But that's not the point. The point is you're going to ignore the black character that is having to do the exact same thing as the white character. You're going to ignore that and you're going to label it as a poor attempt for Capcom, a poor attempt of Capcom to cover their ass. When in reality, the story seems to include Sheva really well. You think that Capcom just went ahead and created this character solely for the purpose of, hey, look, there's also a black character, so we're not being racist. See, black character, we're fine, and they could save face that way. In reality, she seems like she was intended from the start. Not only do you have this main focus of cooperative play, but again, she rolls into the story very well, and she seems to just fit the narrative without any forcing in it. As much as I like to give, don't get me wrong, I love to give this game shit. It's one of my most hated out of the Resident Evil series. I think it's a good game, terrible Resident Evil game, and I love to give it shit as a massive Resident Evil fan. But you cannot try and tell me that Sheva was an afterthought right before the game released to try and cover their asses because they were worried about being taken as racist, because that just does not fit. And don't you think that I've forgotten this little statement of, in 2009, Africa had some of the world's foremost universities situated in bustling urban metropolises. Now, I'm not going to go all the way back to records of 2009. I'm going to just go ahead and look at the current standings. And the top rated university in Africa currently is Cape Town, University of Cape Town, in South Africa, which is rated 125th. You know how far I had to scroll for the next one? The next one in Africa is 244th. So this little comment of the world's foremost universities situated in bustling urban metropolises, this isn't even accurate today. This isn't reality. You just try to throw that in to, make yourself look better and feel better about yourself. Like, ooh, look, Africa have good schools. Like, what? It's not even relevant to the game in any way. Like, we're not in the African metropolises you're talking about. We're in one of the more rural areas of the continent. That's made pretty well clear by the game. And they do that because of a story reason. There is a reasoning behind why they're not in some big city in Africa. They're in one of these smaller villages because it's a biological terrorist organization. It is a terrorist group that is plotting to basically eliminate most of the world, right? That's what Wesker in this story wants to do. So Obviously, they're not going to be in some massive city where anyone and everyone can wander by and see what they're doing. They're going to be hiding somewhere a lot smaller, so they can continue to infect people, but also not have to worry nearly as much about being caught. So I don't know why you even throw this in here, because it's not relevant to the point. It's not relevant to what you're trying to say. It's not the argument that you think that it is. Trust me. You then go on, and I will give you credit where credit is due. You go on to talk about how Resident Evil 4 kind of did the same thing in creating a game region to play in just filled with stereotypes, which is what Resident Evil 4 does, rightfully. You're on the nose with that one, yeah. But then you immediately write it off and give it a pass. You immediately say that because of Resident Evil 4, it's just a campy game and doesn't take itself seriously, that it's fine that they use these stereotypes. It's not that big of a deal. But what's the difference between Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5? Why can RE4 use stereotypes and be completely fine, but RE5 uses stereotypes and that is immediately racist and bad? And I'll tell you the reason. You're trying to make it out to seem that it's because RE4 doesn't take itself seriously and RE5 does. RE5 does not take itself seriously. You literally have a game that is one of the most memed in the series. You crash a plane into an active volcano and punch a boulder to win the game. Like, this is not a serious toned game. It's just not. The idea that RE5 takes itself super seriously, whereas RE4 did not, is absurd. You're trying to cover your own ass and not be called out as a racist yourself, because you think it's fine as long as it's not black people that are made the stereotype. Let's be real here. That's what your issue is that it's not the fact that there are stereotypes in the game, it is who the stereotypes are portraying. You think you need to stand up and defend black people. Like, what's more racist here? The fact that they have stereotypes in a video game, or the fact that you think that you need to stand up and defend against this obvious racism in the world, but you will also completely excuse stereotypes in another game just because it's not it's not the group of people you want to defend. Doesn't that seem a little racist to you, or is that just me? You end by saying that Resident Evil 5, so essentially Capcom, needs to redefine or abandon the game simply because it takes place in Africa. That is your biggest issue. You actually state that you don't think that RE5 is serious enough in its personality or lore to take on a setting like Africa and effectively interrogate the elements of race likely to dominate the minds of most players. That is absolutely ridiculous. First off, no, the game doesn't take itself seriously. Resident Evil has never been a series that takes itself too seriously. The new canon is kind of replacing all the old games with these remakes, and it's coming across a lot more serious in tone. I'm not really sure. We'll see where that's going, but we're still talking about the original series so far, and it never took itself too seriously. Again, you were just praising RE4 for being so campy and over the top, and just using like ridiculous stereotypes and just being a ridiculous game overall. So no, it hasn't taken itself too seriously. Then your next point is that it can't effectively interrogate the elements of race. Well, why does it have to? Why is it necessary for the game to dive into these topics for you? Why does it have to do that? Why can't it just be a video game that takes place in Africa and that's it? There is no deeper meaning behind it, no discussion of race, no discussion of racism. It just is a game that takes place in Africa. Why does it have to be a discussion afterwards? It doesn't. You want it to be, but it doesn't. That's a you problem, not a rest of the world problem. Finally, you state that the elements of race are likely to dominate the minds of most players. if this game were to be remade. No, it wouldn't. This is one of the many memes that have come out of this game being in existence. Is that game journalists flocked to call it racist and created this whole big shit show about it when everyone who played it, for the vast majority of people who played it, never even really thought about it. Nobody really cared that it was taking place in Africa and it featured black people in Africa. Like, that's kind of what you kind of expect when you put a game in Africa, right? Is African people. Jesus. Nobody's gonna sit here and question the ethics of this. No one's gonna sit here and have their minds plagued with the elements of race being included in this game. The only people that are gonna care about this are you. People like you. The vast majority of gamers are going to only care if it's a good game. That's what we want, is another good solid remake from Capcom. And that's even if this is all hypothetical, because Capcom has never stated that they're remaking 5. I personally do think that they will, but regardless, currently that's not even on the table as far as we're aware. But this is why nobody takes game journalists seriously anymore, is because you're more worried about a game having racial issues than it being a good game. Like, this is why no one wants to listen to you. This is why your journalism is dying, is because you are so hyper focused on race and sexism and homophobia and all these political messages that you want to find in video games. Even if they're there or not, you search for them. That is your main goal, seemingly, in life, is to find issues where issues do not exist, to then cause issues. And that's why no one takes you seriously. No one listens to you. No one is wondering what the gamer has to say about anything game related. We use you as a meme. We laugh at you. That's the only real value that you hold, is for people like me to make videos laughing about you on the internet. That's the only real thing that you exist for, especially you in particular, Jade King. Like, you have another article that I'm going to dive into tomorrow probably, and that is about the sexism in Resident Evil 4, a game you were just praising in this article. You are then calling sexist. Like, do you see how ridiculous this is? How insane the vast majority of people probably will see you as? Because that's all I can think, is how fucking crazy you are to sit here in this article calling Resident Evil 5 racist, meanwhile praising Resident Evil 4 for using the same stereotypes, or same stereotype system as Resident Evil 5. However, the stereotypes are about white people, so therefore it's fine. Then, in the next article that you do, you go on to say that Resident Evil 4 is actually really sexist. Like, so no matter what, every game that you talk about has some type of political issue that needs fixing. Like, it's ridiculous. You will never be happy in any video game. Like, there will always be some tiny, tiny issue that you will always forever have with every single game that will ever be made. Everything will somehow have some type of political message behind it. You will make sure to find it. And that's why no one takes you fucking seriously. You're a fucking joke. Jesus. Alright. Now, to everybody else, I hope you enjoyed. And let me know what you think about Resident Evil 5 and the likelihood of a remake. Personally, I think it's the next logical step for Capcom. I think they're going to go ahead and just kind of retcon all of the initial series all the way up to 7. So I think RE5 and 6 are going to get remakes. But what do you guys think? Anyway, like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you later.